Svāyambhuva Manu appearing in the scene, mildly chastising Dhruva Maharaj, uh, indicating how come he is killing all these, so to speak, innocent yakshas who have nothing to do with his brother Uttama's death. And then Svāyambhuva Manu spoke about an essential principle that the Lord, the Supreme Lord, whatever we do, we should be doing it for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. And how do we know that our activities are really pleasing to the Supreme Lord? So, therefore, Svāyambhuva Manu gives the essential principle in that verse number 13 before, that the Lord is very satisfied with his devotee when the devotee greets other people with tolerance, mercy, friendship, and equality. So after talking about these general principles, now Svāyambhuva Manu gets into a philosophical discussion about how would you even ascribe the real cause of your brother's death. Who is the one who actually killed your brother? Therefore, Svāyambhuva Manu gets into the discussion more along the line of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, the simultaneous oneness, simultaneous and inconceivable oneness and difference between Krishna and Krishna's energies, and talking about how to analyze who is the real cause of events that are taking place in this material world. Therefore, Svāyambhuva Manu in this section helps Dhruva Maharaj understand some of the immediate and remote causes of the happenings around him. So he speaks like this, that the creation of the material world begins with the 5 elements, and thus everything, including the body of a man or a woman, is created of these elements. By the sexual life of man and woman, the number of men and women in this material world is further increased. It is simply by the illusory material energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and by the interaction of the 3 modes of material nature that creation, maintenance, and annihilation take place. So this is at a broader scope. Everything is enacted by the interactions of the modes of material nature and the time factor, which is also an energy of the Supreme Lord. So text number 15 purport, Srila Prabhupada brings out Svāyambhuva Manu's line of reasoning, that when Svāyambhuva Manu saw that Dhruva Maharaj understood the philosophy of Vaishnavism, and what is that? The philosophy of Vaishnavism, that greeting other people with tolerance, mercy, friendship, and equality. That's the philosophy of Vaishnavism. And of course, that is rooted and grounded on one's devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So those qualities are not just a sheer exhibition of the quality coming out of mental space, but they are the decoration of the character of a devotee on account of the devotees being steadfast in the process of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is the philosophy of Vaishnavism. So Svāyambhuva Manu saw that Dhruva Maharaj understood the philosophy of Vaishnavism and yet was still dissatisfied because of his brother's death. He gave him an explanation of how this material body is created by the 5 elements of material nature. In the background, of course, there is the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mayadhyakshena. In the 9th chapter, Krishna says, under my superintendence, material nature is acting. Svāyambhuva Manu wanted to impress on Dhruva Maharaj that the death of the material body of his brother was not actually the yaksha's fault. It was an act of the material nature. So the ultimate cause behind everything in material nature is Dhruva's worshipable Lord. And that's what is brought out in purport number 17, that the potter's wheel rotates and several varieties of earthen pots come out. There are many causes for the earthen pots, but the original cause is the potter who sets a force on the wheel. That force comes by his superintendence. The same idea is explained in Bhagavad Gita. Behind all material action and reaction, there is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that Supreme Personality of Godhead is being pointed out in this verse number 17. That Supreme Personality of Godhead is uncontaminated by the material modes of nature. He is the remote cause of the creation of this material cosmic manifestation. When he gives the impetus, many other causes and effects are produced, and thus the whole universe moves, just as iron moves by the integrated force of a magnet. So then the question is, then should Dhruva hold the Supreme Lord responsible for his brother's death? So therefore, Svāyambhuva Manu gives the 18th verse, or states the 18th verse, that it appears that he is acting, but he is not the actor. He is killing, but he is not the killer. Thus, it is understood that only by his inconceivable power is everything happening. So, while the Supreme Lord is the ultimate controller and the cause of everything, he remains aloof from the matter. And by his impetus, different causes and effects, they get produced. So this is the basic idea of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. And Prabhupada brings that out in text number 18. Text number 18 has an interesting word, Nimitta Matra. And at least Prabhupada calls that out in the purport. So Prabhupada brings it out like this, that it is incorrect to argue that because energy issues from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is the actor. In the previous verse, the word Nimitta Matram was used. Remember in Bhagavad Gita, in the 11.33, Krishna uses Nimitta Matra Bhava Savya Sachin for Arjuna. He gives instruction to Arjuna that you simply become Nimitta Matra, where you become an instrument in my hands. So here, same word Nimitta Matra is used to indicate that the Supreme Lord is completely aloof from the action and reaction of this material world. How is everything being done? The word inconceivable has been used. It is not within the power of one's small brain to comprehend. Unless one accepts the inconceivable power and energy of the Lord, one cannot make any progress. The forces which act are certainly set up by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he is always aloof from their action and reaction. So in other words, the setup is from the Supreme Lord, but the actions and reactions, they are all dependent upon the individual desires of the living entities who are exploiting their free will. The varieties of energies produced by the interaction of material nature produce the varieties of species of life and their resultant happiness and unhappiness. This is the paraphrasing of the verse 13.22 from the Bhagavad Gita. The Prakriti, Purusha Prakritistohi Bhumte Prakriti Jan Gunan. And then in the 19th verse, 18th verse, there is some more interesting stuff that is there. Prabhupada points out what is the nature of the material world by comparing the material world to a state in which maintaining law and order is in the hands of the police. So Prabhupada writes that a government state is always supposed to be merciful. But sometimes, in order to keep law and order, the government employs its police force, and thus punishment is meted out to the rebellious citizens. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always merciful and full of transcendental qualities, but certain individual souls have forgotten their relationship with Krishna and have endeavored to lord it over material nature. And accordingly, they are receiving certain response from Krishna's material energy. So after setting up the laws, the Lord, just like the king, remains neutral. And the individuals, they decide whether to maintain the law or to break it. And those who misuse their free will, they break the law and go to prison. So although a prisoner may say that he is suffering because of the king, but we can understand that actually the criminal is suffering that he has caused himself, he has inflicted upon himself. So then Svāyambhuva Manu brings our attention. So after talking about this Achintya Bhedaveda principle, then Svāyambhuva Manu draws our attention to the influence of time, which is the killer of everything. The Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is ever existing, but in the form of time, he is the killer of everything. So by time, he destroys, crushing everything in existence. And this time, which is the potency of the Supreme Lord, it dominates the material world and causes everything in creation to progress and disrupt the stability. So it's interesting that because of this enactment of time, people are always oscillating between these two things, like hope and fear, because people hope that the unpleasant situations that they are going through, they are going to end because the force of time is acting. And likewise, people fear that their current pleasant situations will end, because that's what the time is supposed to do. It's supposed to crush everything. So the people in this world, they always oscillate between these two emotions, hope and fear. But the time is completely indiscriminate and relentless, crushing everything and everyone on its path. And this all-powerful time is nothing but the energy of the super soul, and is an expansion of the Supreme Lord. So therefore, who has ultimately killed your brother Dhruva? So Manu is driving home the point that the events around us, they are neither indicative of the Supreme Lord's specific will, nor his actually doing those or actually enacting those events. And therefore, Dhruva Maharaj should know that the Lord is not the killer. For whatever occurs in the material world is neither the Supreme Lord's will nor his doing. Because the Supreme Lord always stays aloof and only impartially sanctioning the continuous flow of karma, the material actions, and their reactions through his time energy. And therefore, Krishna is sanctioning and yet remaining the ultimate cause of everything. And everyone is just suffering or enjoying only according to his or her own karma. And the Supreme Lord is dishing out the reactions of those karma through the time factor. And therefore, the verse number 22 sums up everything, that the differentiation among varieties of life and their suffering and enjoyment is explained by some to be the result of karma. Others say it is due to nature, others due to time, others due to fate, and still others say it is due to desire. And all of these points are valid, and they are all instrumental in bringing the overall package of events into one's life. So this section is very interesting, because in order to pacify Dhruva Maharaj of the grief that he's going through upon his loss of his brother Uttama, Svāyambhuva Manu is explaining very, very fundamental things, that how the events are actually taking place, and we should keep that in mind, and in this way not start holding people responsible for our own doing, and not just blaming the instruments of our own karma. And that's a very important point that is being brought out. Just very quickly, let's read through the purport of text number 22, where Srila Prabhupada clarifies that it is indeed the living entities freely chosen unlawful desire and their corresponding reactions that are causing their suffering. So Prabhupada is writing, the living entity is not a dead stone. He has different varieties of desires or karma. That karma, this karma or desire cannot be annihilated. There are some philosophers who say that if one gives up his desires, he again becomes liberated. But it is not at all possible to give up desire, for desire is a symptom of the living entity. If there were no desire, then the living entity would be a dead stone. Srila Narottam Das Thakur therefore advises that one turn his desire towards serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then desire becomes purified. And when one's desires are purified, one becomes liberated from all material contamination. The conclusion is that the different philosophers' theories to explain the varieties of life and their pleasure and pain are all imperfect. The real explanation is that we are eternal servants of God, and that as soon as we forget this relationship, we are thrown into the material world, where we create our different activities and suffer or enjoy the result. We are drawn into this material world by desire, but the same desire must be purified and employed in the devotional service of the Lord. Then our disease of wandering in the universe under different forms and conditions will end. Thank you very much.